909 in Studio is brought to you by 90.9 The Bridge in Kansas City. To find out how you can become a sustaining member or to donate, go to bridge909.org. This is just an absolute joy. KT Tunstall joining us today here at The Bridge. And I have to say, it's extra special when somebody has bad routing and they come in anyway. I know it's not the easiest thing in the world to take time out when you're on tour. But
total pleasure. It's so nice to see you.
Congratulations on your new album, Wax. It's absolutely brilliant.
Thank you so much. It's really exciting to feel the mojo is healthier than ever on a 6th record. I was not expecting it, to be honest.
Yeah. So for this album, you've gone out in different ways. You play solo, you play with an all-girl band. Tonight, it's like sort of like a girl's version of the White Stripes.
Exactly. Yeah, me and my amazing drummer, Kat Myers, who often plays with a Scottish rock band called Mogwai, actually. But she's just, I think we found each other and we're just so grateful because we're both really tight on timing, and so I think we kind of gravitated towards each other and went, I want to play with her.
Yeah. You know, just the word timing made me think about all the looping that you do on stage, and there's a lot of that, is my understanding, in the show that you do even with your compatriot. Now, you have sort of upgraded your equipment down through the years. Are you experimenting with looping where both people that are playing get into the same loop?
So we did try that. I have a really great relationship with Roland, and obviously they're just pioneers with making this stuff, and even their stuff couldn't quite do what we needed it to do.
Yeah.
So I think actually the answer is probably designing something. Which is a really exciting thing to do. And I'm actually, considering that I got well known for using a piece of tech, I'm not that nerdy about gear. I'm actually just much more interested in, if there's something I want to do, I want to find something that does it and then get on with playing the song.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of room, definitely, to actually come up with a design that would facilitate two people playing, using loops together in that way, live, using actual beats live rather than pre-programmed stuff.
So, you talk about the song, being driven by the song, and that's been true for you since probably before you can remember. You were begging for piano lessons by the time you were 4.
True statement.
And, and this was like, I kind of love this story. It's like, we always talk about musical households. The only music in your house is your dad had a cassette of Tom Lehrer.
Yeah, and it's unfair on my older brother, actually, because when I got to sort of 7 or 8, he had a cassette player in his room. He had one of the really cool flat ones where you press the eject button and it pops up, and it's like something out of Back to the Future. I had the kind of the household older big one that looked like a breeze block, and he used to play all his favorite music, which was Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, who else? Van Halen. And he would basically play that stuff in his room, and I would record on my tape player through his door. And I would have to kind of stop the tape when he came to the door to shout at me to get away from his bedroom door. I'd be like, no, you're ruining my tape. And I'd be, 8 years old, skipping to school, singing Pour Some Sugar on Me, which is totally inappropriate. But those, I think growing up in the 80s was really significant because you listen to that stuff now and there's superb songs. They're just timeless pop songs that will, it's Madonna and Prince and The Cure, and it's just amazing songcraft.
So when you were taking those piano lessons early on, and there's not really a question here, but I just love this. Your first piano exam, instead of taking your music, you took your coloring book.
I did. And I actually didn't remember that. I just a couple of months ago, my old piano teacher came to a show, just totally surprised me, and was talking to one of my friends who was at the show, and she was like, Did you know that? And I'm like, I'm not sure I ever actually knew that. But yeah, I'd turned up at the exam with my coloring book and my pens, and then when they said, it's time to do the exam, I was like, yeah, it's fine, I can remember it. But I have to say, I did not stay a little pianist prodigy for long. It was very it was very consistent downward trajectory of talent on the piano, all the way to a guitar when I was about 15.
Yeah, you tried flute.
Yeah, I did well at flute, actually. I got my distinction grade 8. I could have gone on and been a flute teacher, but it wasn't really what I was into doing. And it was really interesting with the flute because it actually, it's shown up on this new record. But I got my grade 8 and then at 15 and then put it back in its box and didn't touch it for 10 years. And actually when I came to play it again, all my embouchure and muscles had gone, and I played blues flute. Like I could actually really improvise more. It was proper kind of Ron Burgundy time, and but there was it's not released, and I'd love to release it, but it's on YouTube. If you're familiar with an artist called C6 Steve,
Sure,
bluesman. We did a superb cover of The Letter by the Box Tops, which I play flute on with him and sing with him, and so it's something I'd love to do more of. But there's a song called The Mountain on the new record which showcases my not very good embouchure flute playing anymore.
You're from Scotland. You tried bagpipes, but that was like a no-go.
It was really hilarious because I was so good at, like, naturally capable at music, and I really fancied playing the bagpipes. So I went to the kind of the sign-up class for learning bagpipes, and there's all these kind of thug boys in my class who signed up because it was kind of a macho thing as well to play bagpipes. And because I'd had that classical training, I was looking at the music, and every single little grace note that you hear, the bra 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 bra, it's all written. And it blew my mind. And all the guys who were doing it, I think were just learning by copying, which was actually much easier than trying to analyze what you're actually playing, and I couldn't do it at all. I ended up playing the tenor drum, which is you kind of have the sticks that are flying around with the big pom-poms, and so I just did that instead. It was great.
So around 16, you end up with a guitar. No lessons there, self-taught.
Yeah.
And that pretty much sparked your songwriting as well.
Yeah, I'd been really obsessively into Roald Dahl and Dr. Seuss, and I loved The Muppet Show and Sesame Street. They were like the 4 early teachers of songwriting for me, and I think that they were amazing places to start because first of all, it's immaculate rhyming. All of those songwriters that and Roald Dahl and Dr. Seuss, they never ever strayed outside of perfect rhythm. And it really annoys me now. Like, it used to really get my goat when I'd read stuff and go, but that's not the right number of syllables. And also my dad had a Tom Lehrer tape, and, he managed to do the table of elements with the right number of syllables where it turns around at the right time.
Yeah, that's a perfect cassette for your dad because he's a physicist.
Exactly. My nerdy physicist dad listening to a satirist mathematician from Harvard singing Gilbert and Sullivan style songs about the table of elements. He was in heaven. But yeah, I mean, and not surprisingly, Tom Lehrer actually ended up writing for Sesame Street.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he did end up on the writing team, and even now I listen to that stuff, and it's just such clever songwriting. It's brilliant.
Well, sorry for the run into the past, but I wanted everybody to have sort of a foundational thing about your background as we get into some of the things that you've done as an adult, which have been really wide-ranging. KT Tunstall joining us, new album Wax. We'd love to hear a song if we could.
Yeah, I'd love to play one.
Taken away from each other, but I will let you be connected to me by a red science to one another, to one another. but you got so started. Time is an illusion, less confusion, these two enemies. Take a hand, make a plan, and imagine every single soul standing for something. There's a thread that's led us to each other over centuries. We're gonna break it, gonna break it. Yeah, you know we're gonna break it, gonna break it. We don't ever wanna break it, wanna break it. Oh, we say we'll never break it, never break it. When we find that it's all, find that it's all just made of a little red thread. Find that we're wrong, find that we're wrong, just made of a little red thread. Oh, and find out. Oh, it's just a little red thread. Oh, when we find out. Oh, it's just a little red thread.
You owned that.
Thank you.
That was great. That's the first track on the new album. It's called Little Red Thread. And when I started listening to the record, I'm just like a few beats in. It's like, okay, here
Yeah.
we go.
It was a really conscious choice to use that song as the opener. I think the opening song on an album is often my favorite song on a record. Tangled Up in Blue, Bob Dylan. I can't actually remember. What's the first track on Hunky Dory, David Bowie? I'm trying to think.
I don't remember.
I can't think. But it often turns, it's just because it's the entry point into that album. So every time you listen to it, it's the thing that resets your head into listening to it.
And it feels like a departure.
It is, yeah, definitely. This record has ended up being the second in a trilogy that I decided to make, where the last record was all about the sort of ascension of soul and spirit and coming through some difficult stuff. And I usually you'd kind of decide to make a trilogy before you started making it. I got one part in, and I was on tour with the last record, and I thought how cool it would be that last album was all about the soul. That this next record, I knew I wanted to make a harder rock record, and that to me absolutely speaks of the physical. So I thought, let's make a trilogy, soul, body, and mind. So I'm now on part 2, which is the body, and I wanted to explore electric guitar playing more, and so that's that riff as well, like exploring guitar riffs. A big Jack White fan, and the way that he constructs riffs and the way that they sit within his songwriting. And the riff for this song, actually, I'd written with Angelo Petraglia, who was the guy who wrote a lot of the early stuff with Kings of Leon. And I'd had that riff forever and couldn't come up with a song around it. And the same within this body on this record as well. So it's all my killer guitar riffs that I never knew what to do with have kind of found their home on this record.
Talking about the idea of making it a trilogy after the first one was already out, that actually came to you like in a burst. It almost sounds like divine intervention. You were meditating in a park in Nashville, and all of a sudden it just arrives almost complete.
Yeah, it was an absolute moment of vision, of knowing that it was the right thing to do, and it answered a lot of problems. One being, it's very frustrating that it takes so long between records, and it doesn't seem to matter what you do. It always seems to take a long time because, especially when you have fans all over the world, it's going to take a couple of years to get one record around everybody. And then usually you would take a year to write the material, maybe 6 months to write the material if we're lucky, and then a few months to record, and then another few months to mix, and then, your label is usually going to need at least 3 to 6 months up front to get it ready and send it to the press and all of that stuff. So I would just be thinking, hang on a minute, all the guys, all the bands I listened to used to put out a record a year in the 70s, And so doing this trilogy idea sort of helps speed that process up, and it can be a real wrench, the momentum of putting a record out, having a fallow period, putting a record out. And I was just like, let's just get on the train and stay on the train. And also, I work much better under pressure. So if I have to write something and there's no end point, it'll take me until I'm done, and that's a long time. Whereas if I really put a date on something, and if I put pressure on something, then I tend to actually not only work quicker, but I tend to come up with better material.
So, the new record's been out a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So how's the third one coming along?
It's going
it's
good,
gonna be
actually.
really soon.
It's going good. I've started it. There's also an element of looking at material that I haven't explored from, ideas, which is great. And I think there's sometimes a bit of a kind of taboo attached to going back and looking at older material and reworking it. And I remember reading Tom York talking about it, and they were saying that some of their music is audio sketches from college, and going back to these ideas. And it's interesting because they weave a web between what was going on then and what's going on now. But I've written a new song with Martin Terefa, who's a longtime collaborator. We wrote Other Side of the World together. We've recently written The River together. And I'm really excited about that. But writing about the brain and about neural process and programming and conditioning, it's really fascinating. So it's going to be a very interesting, and it's also the brain that is actually making you come up with this stuff. So
kind of meta.
And with this album, it's the body that's actually playing the music. So it's a really interesting kind of mirror throughout the process.
So you were talking about wanting this to be a rock record. I found a quote that you said that you really need to be sweaty.
It's totally true. So it was after my fourth record, Invisible Empire Crescent Moon, which I'm hugely proud of. But it was funeral music, really. It was born out of my father passing away, getting divorced. I mean, it was a real life change, and it was quite a medicinal process, making that out of a lot of pain. And I'd gone on the road to tour that record, and it was all theaters, and I was wearing suits, and it was all very nice. And it was a really beautiful experience because it was very emotional music. But I kind of got to the end of that tour and thought I didn't want to make records anymore. And promptly moved to Venice Beach, California, and started working on movies instead. But actually what I realized once I got back to it and did a couple of one-off solo shows, which was more of a back catalogue rather than that down-tempo, quite melancholic record, was it needs to be a kinetic experience for me. It needs to be physical. And, there's been times where I've had to fight with booking agents and promoters because they say, oh, everybody wants to sit down. I'm like, well, I don't want to do that. So we either do a smaller show where some people stand and some people sit, or maybe I won't bother because I love doing curated tours that are so doing seated theaters is wonderful, but it's not what I want to do all the time. I need that energy for sure.
You mentioned the film work. You got accepted into, it's really tough to get into this.
It
right?
is, yeah.
Sundance Institute's Film Composers Lab. Mm-hmm. At Skywalker Ranch. Are you a Star Wars fan?
I am the craziest. What, are you kidding me? I'm making a trilogy. I'm a crazy Star Wars fan. It was amazing. So Skywalker Ranch is George Lucas's place up in Northern California, and it's where a lot of huge movies are scored and mixed. It's where audio engineers go to die if they've been good. And it was so funny. There's a ranch up there that he still owns, and I think is there some of the time. And you get it, if you're lucky, you get a tour of the second floor, which you're not allowed to go to unless you're escorted. And there's all these artifacts. There's Charlie Chaplin's cane and hat.
Wow.
There's Indiana Jones's hat and whip. There's a bunch of Star Wars stuff. So I'm just like, they're all kind of getting a tour, and I'm just staring in the cabinet, looking at the lightsaber, and I'm looking at it, and I look really closely, and there's a sticker on it that says "Made in China." And I was like, "What? This can't be right." And I said to the woman, I was like, what's this about? And she was like, oh, I think the other one broke. I was like, you need to take the sticker off, man. That impaired my experience.
That is hilarious. But they bring in other composers. They bring in film directors.
Yeah.
And you were paired up with Dan Kwan.
Oh, I was extremely lucky. I mean, it was just an extraordinary experience. The steepest learning curve of my adult life, for sure. I had to learn Pro Tools, which is a music program, in about 3 weeks, because you're literally given a little room with a computer. You bring whatever instruments you want to play. And what would happen is that absolute luminaries like James Newton Howard, Harry Gregson Williams, Alan Silvestri, Back to the Future score came up, and they would spend an evening with us giving us a lecture about their process. Then they would choose a scene from one of the movies they had scored for maybe a 4-minute scene. They would take the music off, show us it in the theatre, and then we had 24 hours to score that scene ourselves. And then we would have to go back into the cinema with all 6 of us and screen what we'd written.
That wouldn't have been uncomfortable at all.
They made it surprisingly relaxing, actually, and part of the reason that they were able to do that was because they really treated us like peers rather than students. And Harry was funny. He was like, sometimes we'd play him stuff. He'd like, God, that's better than what I did. He'd get quite annoyed, and it was a really lovely atmosphere. And I remember one morning, as I said, they score a bunch of big movies up there. I was having breakfast, and they had these amazing elves that would come and wash everything up. And it was just a beautiful existence. But I was eating breakfast, and I put my breakfast bowl in the sink, and I heard this gruff voice behind me go, "Where do I put my things, my bowl?" I was like, oh, I think you just put it in the sink and the magical brownies come and take it away. And I turn around and it's Guillermo del Toro. And I was like, wow, I just told Guillermo del Toro where to put his breakfast bowl. But yeah, so the second week that you're there, you're paired up with directors who've been working on the director's lab. And I was just over the moon to be paired up with Dan Kwan from the Daniels, and who they wrote and directed Swiss Army Man, which is an insane movie. If you haven't seen it, it's
been on my list. I just haven't gotten around to it.
Absolutely 100% bonkers. It's Daniel Radcliffe, who's obviously Harry Potter, playing a dead guy who washes up on an island where Paul Dano has been stranded, and Paul Dano is basically delirious and starts hallucinating that Daniel Radcliffe is alive. So he ends up with this corpse best buddy. It's crazy. I'm helping score the scene where he's riding the corpse as a jet ski, and the corpse is farting. That's how it's propelled. So you get the idea of what I was basically dealing with.
That's tough.
Dan and I it was really fun though, because they wanted to use looping as a natural way. So it was almost like his psyche, what he was hearing was becoming the soundtrack. So we were kind of running all around the outside of the ranch, finding pipes and twigs and branches and stones and recording things. It was fantastic.
Well, you have gone on to contribute music to Winter's Tale, $1 Million Arm, About Ray, Tinkerbell, Legend of the Never Beast, Bad Moms, and more. So that was working pretty well for you. But we're here to talk about Wax, your new album, and we'd love to hear another song if we could.
Yeah, so this next song, I recently wrote one of my first songs on tour. I would not usually write on tour, but this one came out on a bus in Austin, Texas.
I carved a hole in the sun, black edges, easy to get lost in there, easy to get lost out there. I found myself underway, trying to fill the gaps, to stop the drag, where the hope escapes. I got a hold it's unreasonable to feel. I starved my soul of the one thing that now I see I should have had. I just repeated till I went mad. And this body knows what this body never shows. Just leave it to guessing. I should write you a letter, hold out up until the final chapter, be the successor, and watch this specter burn. So take it back that I'm lacking anything, saying it might make it easier, but it's backlash and vinegar. I'm just a being, wondering if that's even feasible, and if it's unreasonable to feel. Oh, 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 yeah, oh, oh. So take it back that I'm lacking anything, saying it might make it easier, but it's backlash and vinegar. I'm just a being, wondering if that's even feasible, and if it's unreasonable to feel. Oh, wondering if that's even feasible, and if it's unreasonable to feel.
Backlash and Vinegar, another track from the new album Wax. Katie Tunstall in the studio with us today. So when you were doing all that film music, there was a part of you that didn't know if you were going to come back and do the regular grind. Moved to LA, but driving around the canyons, listening to Neil Young and Fleetwood Mac and Joni Mitchell and Tom Petty changed things.
It did. I'd gone through that. I think what happened was I needed to completely disengage from the necessity to make music, and I needed to come back to it as something I was choosing to do. And I think because I'd been trying to get somewhere as a musician since I was 18, and all through my 20s, I had no money trying to make it. I actually didn't get my record deal till I was 28. And it was partly why I was so inspired by Patti Smith's cover of Horses, which is what the song Suddenly I See is about, was that photograph by Robert Mapplethorpe. And it was because I'm looking at this woman who just isn't trying. And I was like, oh man, I'm just trying and trying and trying. And I think that, you know, I got to whenever it was, 2012, and I'd had that success, and I'd done my 4th record, been through losing a parent, getting divorced, moving continents, which was part of the process of change. I realized I hadn't really expanded very much as a person. I'd certainly got better as a songwriter and a performer, but I think that the private side of myself had been somewhat neglected, and I'd just been completely absorbed in being a known musician. And if you said, "Who are you?" I'd say, "I'm Katie Tunstall, I'm a musician." And I knew that that wasn't really a very cool answer. The cool answer is, "Hi, I'm Kate, and that's what I do for a living, and that's what I do for passion as well." But there needs to be something entirely separate from that that knows who she is and can sit alone with no tour, with no record, with no camera, with nothing to promote and no one listening, and be happy. And I wasn't. So I really thought that I was going to just, and I actually felt that the process of putting records out wasn't helping, because it's so narcissistic a lot of the time. I mean, it's incredibly selfish life being a solo artist. I've probably being in a band as well, which is why it's so hard being in a band. I don't envy that one. And I think that if I'd started writing more folk inspired music, which I think what that fourth record was, I probably would have shelved it and not bothered putting anything out for a while. But I was listening to this amazing 60s and 70s West Coast rock, which I call muscular pop music. And I was waking up in the middle of the night with these really big, heavy-duty choruses. And the world had gone somewhat darker since I'd gone through what I'd gone through. And things were on the turn of being incredibly divisive, as we see now. And it felt like I was writing really positive music. And I actually felt that it was a good thing to do, to put out a positive record. And I'm glad I did.
So you did Kin, which is the Spirit record in the trilogy.
Yes.
The new one that we're talking about now is Wax, which is the Body record.
Yeah.
And, you know, you spoke about the inspiration of Patti Smith. You were also inspired by Kurt Vonnegut.
I was.
Which makes you, like, I love you now, right?
There's this amazing quote, which I think I laughed for 10 minutes because I was thinking about this connection between the spirit and the body. And there's a quote from his book, Bluebeard, that says,
Would you like me to read it?
Well, no, I think I can remember.
Okay.
It's my soul knows my meat is doing bad things and is embarrassed, but my meat carries on doing dumb, stupid things. And it was just the total absurdity of being this transcendent, conscious soul, which I'd really been focused on through that healing of expanding my mind and spirit. And then you need to go to the bathroom. It's just ridiculous. And then you stub your toe, as you're walking to your yoga class.
Yeah.
It's just so stupid. And we have to drive this crazy meat car through life, and we only get one. And it's like we always sort of talk about flaws as human beings. And actually, I'm starting to think that it's really unkind on ourselves to say they're flaws, because we're human beings. So there's these inbuilt stupid things that we do, which we can't really avoid. And that's maybe part of the journey, is that we're learning to see that stuff and examine that stuff.
So the first song that we were introduced to Wax through is The River. Mm-hmm. And you talked earlier about how some songs were in process for a long time. The River is about 10 years?
Yeah, that had been actually written during the writing sessions for Drastic Fantastic, my second record. And it didn't fit the song. And I also hadn't nailed the chorus lyrics. They weren't completely personal. So the original version, it had me saying, I know where you've been, which just sounds kind of icky,
The thing that's, I think it was probably Joseph Campbell who first brought this up, but, water is cleansing, and it signifies rebirth in, almost every culture. And it seems like that really fits this song. It's almost like a baptism. Yeah,
absolutely. And I follow lots of funny things on Instagram, but there was one that came up. It was I think a Native American chief had quoted saying, water can teach you a lot. You should get to know it. You should listen to it and have a conversation with it. And, it's but really the sentiment behind this song is just that feeling you get of how present it makes you if you jump into water, and the impact of it, and it's like a pattern interrupt, you know.
Well, we'd love to hear another song if we could.
Yeah.
KT Tunstall live in the Bridge Studios.
I'm holding on to something I don't want to hold on to. I'm reaching out for something I can't touch, although I know I want to. Taking in the scenery, you're the ghost in my machinery. When I was good as gold, I was good as gold. Closing off the avenues to places that I never knew. And now I'll never know. Now I'll never go. I listen and I hear you speak. Am I missing something? I wanna jump into the river, feel it on my skin. Oh, but the river is rocks and I'm already lost, and I know where I've been. Oh, I know where I've been. I feel I'm caught in a beautiful dream. I am cold, and my heart has told me it's a dark sea. Running through the middle of a life that's full of green love, and everything is mine. Everything is mine. I listen and I hear you speak. Am I missing something? I wanna jump into the river, feel it on my skin. Oh, but the river is rocks and I'm already lost, and I know where I've been. Ooh, yeah, yeah, whoa, I listen and I hear you speak. Am I missing something? I wanna jump into the river and feel it on my skin. Oh, but the river is rocks and I'm already lost, and I know where I've been. Oh, I know where I've been. Yes, I know where I've been.
Wow. That was great.
Thank you so much.
The River, and of course, that's the lead track from the new album, Wax. The second in a trilogy. You know, you not only have the trilogy, you not only have the film work, you've been coy about this, so you can continue to be coy about it if you want to, but you're working on a musical.
I am. I actually have a few things in that world tucked up my sleeve, and unfortunately, it's nothing that I can name
So
yet.
coy again.
But coy as ever on this. But it's really interesting progression for me because I grew up intensely disliking musical theatre. I was in a little local theatre group, and we wouldn't do known musicals. It was a local musician would write for us, and it was great. And we'd sometimes learn, Les Mis or West Side Story at school, and it wasn't for me at all. It just seemed so overly dramatic, and it seemed so like, I don't know, there's something quite two-dimensional about it, where it didn't seem real to me. And then my mind was completely changed by going to see Book of Mormon. And then and actually, the other seed was an amazing Jeff Goldblum movie called The Tall Guy, where he plays the part of the Elephant Man in a musical. And just that humor really shifted it for me. And then my eyes kind of opened to what was possible, and how musical theatre was changing, and how the tastes for musical theatre was changing. And I went to see Matilda, which is by brilliant Tim Minchin, who I love. And that again was just mind-blowingly good. And also just the progression in production was so exciting as well. And then a lot more people were using musicians on stage. And then, of course, Sarah Bareilles has had amazing success with Waitress, which I saw recently, which I thought was brilliant. And I'd written a couple of songs. I'd been commissioned to write a couple of songs for a big show in Berlin called The One Grand Show. And it was in German, but they wanted a couple of songs in English. And it was sort of like, oh, well, this isn't Broadway and this isn't the West End in London, and I can have a go and see how I get on. And it was just this huge Cirque du Soleil style production that ran for a couple of years in Berlin. Costumes by Jean-Paul Gaultier, just beautiful. And I loved it. And it was a very different style of writing. And I'm very big on melody, and that's, I think, one of the most important things when it's coming to writing for musical theatre.
That's the best answer I've ever heard without telling us what we asked.
Without actually telling you anything.
Yeah, that was really, really good. It's been such a joy, and I'm going to go back to what I said at the very beginning. I know your schedule's really tough. Oh. Being on the road is not easy. This has been a total gift. Cannot tell you how much we appreciate your being here today. KT Tunstall, the new album Wax, and appearing tonight at the Record Bar. Thanks so much for coming in.
Mutual feelings. Thank you so much for having me. I still get so excited about being on the radio. So thank you so much.
KT Tunstall live on the bridge.